Hello and welcome to Athletic Therapy Now, a podcast for athletic therapists by an athletic therapist. My name is Ashley Burr and I will be your host. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to episode 20 of Athletic Therapy Now. Today we have Becky Swan with us. Becky is an athletic therapist and strength and conditioning specialist working as the wellness coordinator for the West Vancouver Police Department. Not long after becoming a certified athletic therapist in 2007, she started working with the Canadian women's senior and E20 soccer teams. Working with sports teams was her ultimate goal when graduating. However, in 2010, she accepted a fitness coordinator position with the Vancouver Police Department. It didn't take long for her to discover that working with police officers and their wellness was a passion. Perhaps it is related to the fact that her dad is a retired RCMP officer. In 2013, she stepped away from sport and decided to specialize in police officer wellness. In 2018, she also completed her Masters of Rehabilitation Science at UBC, where she focused on police officer wellness and did a research project that studied effective implementation of physical rehabilitation in police departments based on stakeholder perspectives. By the time she transitioned from Vancouver Police Department to the West Vancouver Police Department, she had grown her single position to a team that also included 2 additional athletic therapists, a fitness coordinator, and a contract physiotherapy and RMT services. In May 2024, she took on the new West Vancouver Police Department Wellness Coordinator role and is developing the department's wellness program for officers and civilian staff, focusing on athletic therapy, strength and conditioning, nutrition, and expanding services to create a holistic approach to wellness. Recognizing that she works with a trauma-exposed population, she incorporates a trauma-informed approach in her services. Away from her day-to-day work, she speaks internationally at conferences to share knowledge and trends related to police officer wellness, and she volunteers on physical health working group and mental health working group for the International Association of Chiefs of Police, as well as on the board of directors for the Canadian Athletic Therapists Association. In her free time, I'm questioning what free time you have, she tries to spend as much time as possible outside exploring trails and all of the adventures that BC can provide with Danif Pup, Mabel, and husband Steve. So thank you for joining us today, Becky. I really
Thank you so
appreciate you
much.
coming on and chatting with us today. And you do so much. Like that is crazy how many different hats you're wearing right now.
There are a few different ones. Yeah. It's I get excited about everything that can kind of fall under AT. So I have been known to wear too many hats, and I'm working on these are less hats than usual, which is a good accomplishment for me. So yeah, there's a few hats going on there.
Yeah, I love that about AT where it's there's so many opportunities and things that we can do, and I'm guilty of it too, where, if I have a free moment because things have settled down in one place, I'm really bad at picking up something, like a podcast.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like a good way to spend my time, and then I things pick up in other places and I realize that I'm wearing too many hats. So I think that's a typical thing among ATs, right?
I think so. I do think
Yeah.
so, and I think part of it is even goes back to our roots when we first graduate, when we're trying to get our footing and trying to make enough money and doing a lot of piecemeal stuff. So almost from the get-go, we're used to holding on to a whole bunch of different things, and then luckily, as we get older and get a bit more established, we can start weaning those off and be a little bit more particular, which is great. And but I find my eyes always staying open because it's just been open for so long, looking at what are some options out there, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think it stems from even further behind that because when I was in university, we had to do, what was it like? Um, was it 2,000 hours of clinical and 2,000 field?
There's a lot, yeah. Yeah.
Whatever it was, and then
It might have been
our
1,200 and 1,200.
that sounds more accurate. I just
It was a
remember my
lot though.
prof saying, like, "Whatever 1,200 you do, you need more than that. Like, you need to
Yeah,
go
yeah,
above and beyond that to really
yeah,
get a hang of things." And so, like,
absolutely.
I had this crazy schedule where I'd essentially be out of the house from, 6 a.m. to probably close to midnight. And it was all school and practicums and all of that, to the point where my mom actually thought that I was, like, out partying. She couldn't believe that there was any way I was doing schoolwork for the entire day.
And you're like, "Nope, I am." Yeah, and it's like that for a lot of students. Like my last year at Sheridan, um, just to avoid going into a long story, I was denied my student loan. I ended up getting $300, and so then I started working on top of my placements and everything. And I think at one point I had 5 part-time gigs from helping, like, the AT office, doing paperwork, and then a clinic at a placement at. They're like, "Oh, you can work our front desk." So it was like anywhere I could get 1 or 2 hours of work to try and finish my last year, right? At least I knew it was
Yeah.
the home stretch, so I'm like, "Okay, it's not always gonna be this crazy." But, one of my classmates, because I worked at a pub at night as well, and we'd have, our first responder course in the morning, and they're like, "We always know when you fall asleep on the spinal board because your breathing changes," and I'm like, "Well, you gotta nap somewhere," right? You're like, "I'll play the victim, let me sleep, please."
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. So that, one of the questions I like to ask everybody is, out of all of those things, like, what is your favorite thing about being an athletic therapist?
Oh, there is a lot. I'd say right now, because it can vary, right? I loved field when I did it. Right now, I'm loving the problem solving of trying to help somebody and from gathering information. So talking with the individual, finding out how they express what they're feeling and helping them try and find the words to describe what's going on in their body. Because if you help them do that, they can tell you what's going on. They just don't necessarily know how to articulate it. But then also taking your biomechanics knowledge and being like, okay, well, what's going on here and how is the biomechanics of the body impacted by external forces? So with police, like their load carriage and how has that played a role over 1, 2, 5, 10, 15, 20 years? And so I'm really liking that part right now, especially when I have an individual who knows their body well. So they come in and they're like, I know it's only like 5 degrees off, but it's off and I need this corrected, right? And then we can play around with it. So I love that. I say it's when I really get a nerd out and go in the gym and we're just playing around and finding that spot and then working on it and then come back and retest, especially when they get just as excited in learning about themselves. And so I really like, yeah, that problem solving aspect right now and getting to know the different personalities. So
Yeah, that's really cool. I love that as well. Like that, here is the problem and how do we get to that solution and what are the, infinite amount of ways that we can get there
yeah,
and which
yeah.
which one works for you. Yeah.
Absolutely, right? And then seeing that light bulbs go off on their head when something connects and they're like, "Oh, that makes so much sense," right? And they're like, "Oh." But then also for me when I'm like, "You just taught me something. This is amazing." So, yeah,
Yeah,
so
I
it's
love
a
when it
fun.
turns into that wow moment too. So like
Mhm.
something changes from, like they might have pain at the beginning of a session and all of a sudden they have no pain and they have full strength and they get that wow, like what did you just do? I
Yeah.
didn't actually touch you.
Yeah,
That was
yeah.
all you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sometimes like, I don't know. I tried this thinking I can't explain why it's gonna happen, but let's try it. And okay, it did. Note to self, this works, right? So yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's a lot of fun exploring, and I think with my setting too, um, I feel like I have a little bit more freedom with going outside the box because people aren't necessarily paying for their session. I don't have time restrictions, so our appointment's as long or as short as I want it to be, right? And they're not paying for it, so sometimes people can come in with expectations like, "Why am I coming in? I'm paying this money." And so I think that too gives a lot of freedom as a practitioner, which I've really appreciated because I haven't had to be stuck in, okay, we only get 30 minutes or this is only how much we're allowed to do. No, we can do whatever, right? We have the world's our oyster.
That's great. Yeah, in my practice I allow clients to choose their time. So I
Nice.
have that flexibility in my clinic and I've been given that flexibility. And so they can choose anything between 30 minutes and 90 minutes. And
Nice.
as a practitioner, that's taken a lot off of me and thinking like, okay, I only have 30 minutes. What can I do? And maybe I need to go like a little bit over time just to help this person. And now because I give the client the choice, it's on that side of like, well, they chose it. So I'm going to respect their time
Yep.
and if they don't want that extra time, that's on them. So we're going to
Yep.
do what we can in this time and leave it at that.
Yep,
And
exactly. And that's good great way to put it, right? Because we can't take that on for ourselves too, otherwise that's a slippery slope for us.
yeah, yeah. It took me a while to get to that point of realizing that it's not on me.
I feel like it's a rite of passage, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, can we talked about it a little bit in your bio, but can you share your story about how you became a certified athletic therapist working within the police force and what inspired you to pursue that path?
Yeah, so I became certified in 2007 from Sheridan, and I moved back to BC and got soccer, but it wasn't full time. So I was also working in a clinic from 2008 to 2010, and I was their first AT. It was more of a kinesiology clinic, and it was okay. But I'm very much a high growth person. If I don't have growth opportunity, it just doesn't work for me. And um, so I just saw the posting with the VPD one day, and I was reading through it, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, like this describes me." And I shared it to my dad, and he's like, "You're gonna apply, right?" And it's more, he saw that yes, it fit me, but dad's, he's like, "This is stable and it's a pension." So because he didn't understand contractor, he's like, "No, you can't do that. Like you need a pension, you need to have a structured plan." And honestly, when I went in, I really just saw it as a stepping stone. I don't think I necessarily looked at it as some who would think, "Oh, it's cool, it's a police department," because I grew up around police officers. So the my dad was in forensic identification for 30 years, and we moved around every 5 years. So the only people we hung out with were police families, and so police officers are just very normal to me. And as I like to call them, they're very homey. They give me that sense of comfort because it's just personalities that I know. And so that wasn't necessarily the draw. It was, yeah, honestly, it was okay, stepping stone until I see something else. But pretty quickly, I was seeing the impact that we can have as an athletic therapist in this setting. And I start questioning, like, why don't we have treatment in police settings, right? If you compare a police officer, which people often call one of the tactical athletes, with regular athletes, the consequences, if they're not able to perform their skill set and their physical duties, the consequence much more dire than a regular athlete, right? Like they can die, their partner can die, the community can suffer, really bad individuals can get away. And so that's when I started pursuing a bit more of, okay, well, what is out there? And luckily enough as it was, they already had an up down table in the office for the fitness coordinator, and it was because a few of the people before me were ATs, but it wasn't hands on treatment, and so there was not a barrier to implementing hands on care. I was able to meet with the inspector of HR and my inspector, and we had a coffee, and I told him, like, why don't I do an article every month to encourage people to come in for free treatment? And this is how ignorant I was into a police department. And then, maybe that'll motivate people for treatment. All I had to say was free, and I was booked up within a month. Like I never once wrote a single article in my almost 14 years there about like trying to get people to come in. So the interest was absolutely there. So luckily for me, that wasn't the barrier. Um, but then working with them and seeing how much we could help, especially with how we're educated on assessing biomechanics. And even when we think about how we've looked at it with football or hockey equipment and how we adjust, we've already have that mindset. So PPE, so the vest and the belt's not different. It's just equipment we haven't been exposed to. And that's when I really started to fall in love with it. And so for my first couple of years with VPD, I was doing soccer on all my holiday time, which is not healthy either, right? My only vacation time was traveling internationally with soccer, which was amazing, but I had to make a choice. And police were where my heart was, and I haven't regretted it. Like, I miss field work, but it's very rewarding working, knowing I can help the individuals that sacrifice so much. Most don't see it. The media does not share the majority of the stuff that they do and how much they sacrifice their relationships with their family and their own health and well-being just to try and support the community. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to help those who help everybody.
That's great. Like I love that you're making those comparisons between how the police force, there's still those tactical athletes, and I think you've hit the nail on the head there where it's, their consequences if they get injured in the field and continue and they can't get back into the field is much higher than if an athlete can't complete their job at 100%, right?
Mm.
And I think we forget about that, and I think they forget about that, and just in general, the world forgets about that. I work with some fire paramedic people who have injured themselves in the field, and going through workers' compensation, and it's kind of like, well, if you go back to work today, are you going to be able to do a carry if you have to take somebody out of a burning building, right? Like, are you
Mhm.
safely going to be able to do that, or are you compromising other people? Because that's the real question as to whether or not you can go back to work. Is
Yeah.
how is this going to affect the people around you? Like, yeah, you could do it, but can you do it without those major consequences on the other side of it?
Yeah.
Um,
And even how does it impact your retirement? Like I talk to our recruits the first day I meet them, like part of what I'm telling you now is to set that seed because I want you to enjoy your retirement. You're going to be working your butt off. You're going to be sacrificing a lot. You deserve to retire early. And I don't want you spending your first 5, 10 years out of retirement trying to recover from everything that you've gone through. And then with the injuries, not only are they like there's pressure on them to come back because if they're not back quickly, then there's more members working overtime and there's less boots on the ground protecting the community, but then more overtime means more injuries and then more health problems, which is then the snowballing thing and then increased budget. So it just ripples out so far.
yeah, it's more than just one person who has an injury and you're helping them get better. Like it affects the entire system when somebody
Yeah,
is injured. And
yeah,
it affects them in a positive way when they can come back and we can get them back quickly.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. What unique challenges have you encountered while navigating your role in the police force as an athletic therapist?
There's definitely been a lot, and it's not a good or a bad thing. It's what happens when you are navigating a newer route for something. And so that initial phase with implementing athletic therapy at Vancouver was fairly easy, as I mentioned. But then as we tried to grow and progress it, there was definitely challenges from them understanding the value of the position and the need for more. So I was very overworked for a long time before getting more staff, and then we were able to get some more staff in, and so that was a challenge. And then even some of the initiatives I would try, and I don't want this to scare people away from trying in the policing environment. Um, it's just part of what it is if they don't know where it should go or who should approve it in the organizational structure, it can take a long time. So, because police organizations are paramilitary, there is a very specific chain of command, and there's a lot of different chain of commands that all trickle up to the chief. And it's not always your chain of command that has to approve something. So if they don't know where something goes, they'll try one and maybe it goes up a few steps and they determine, oh no, this is the wrong chain. And it doesn't go lateral, it goes back down. And then it's okay, well, let's try this other one. But then maybe it goes and it's the right chain, but then there's a whole promotional process and everybody changes. So it goes back down and you got to try again. And so I've had some, so the contract therapy, I first initiated that in 2015 and it was finally implemented in 2022, and it was just taking that long for like everybody was supportive but then to figure out how to do it. And it was the same with getting a strength and conditioning app. That being said, it's also related to the size of the organization, right? My biggest thing that I'm getting used to with my new department, so Vancouver was over 2,000 people, sworn and civilian. My new department, hopefully my dog's too loud right now, Mabel.
She's good. She's good.
She's okay. She's just barking right now, so, I need to
Can't even
grab
hear
her
it.
to pardon?
Can't even hear it.
Oh, okay, okay, good, I'll just keep talking and ignore her until you see a big lick on the side of my face. My new department, I was saying, is with foreign and civilian, it's about 120 people, so it's much smaller, and so things are approved very quickly. Okay, she's gone. You see her nose? So
Yeah.
she's a Daniff is a Mastiff Dane, and so she's 15 months and she's about 115 pounds. So
Oh
she's
my
so
gosh.
big.
I just love that she's trying to push you over. Like, "Mom, pay attention to me."
Yeah, and I took her out for a long walk and everything before that. So hopefully this didn't distract the listeners too much. But so navigating bureaucracy and red tape is a challenge. Um, but even with all the challenges I've been through, I would not trade it for the world. It is worth it, and it's worth it to get more services to the officers. And the feedback from the officers, from the civilians that you work with day in, day out, they're so appreciative of the support and having a resource like this on site that it just makes you want to fight harder and be like, no, I'm going to get you more. No, I'm going to get you more. And that was the same with VPD, and it's here. It's the people are just incredible. So it's one where if you can withstand some heavy storms, just know there is such an amazing sunset at the end of it every time, right? So you just kind of have to keep focusing on that.
That's really awesome, and it sounds like, even though there is a lot of challenges there, it's completely worth it and completely worth the time that you have to put into it in order to, get the result that you're looking for.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I can imagine the red tape and, that whole chain of command that you're talking about where, it goes all the way up and then you go, "Oh, oops, gotta switch, restart,
Yep.
restart." And I was in the military for a very short period of time,
Okay.
but I could even see that then when I was 16, right? So like it was choices were made and they weren't the right choices for me. But yeah, I even at that point, getting that approval for anything was crazy. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
understand that. So, how does your approach to injury prevention and treatment differ when you're working with police officers compared to a more traditional private clinic setting? And I assume that at this point you're going to talk a little bit about some of the trauma informed care that you so widely speak about internationally. Is
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Um, they are I guess the way we describe them more now, and it's a term that I learned from Tim Black, who I did my trauma resiliency training through him with Wounded Warriors Canada, and we're trying to a lot are trying to change a language about around these type of professionals. So we'll say, they're tactical athletes and they're tactical professionals. And now, in terms of the trauma realm, we do consider them trauma exposed professionals. Same with paramedics, fire, nurses, doctors. And you can even argue, depending on what work coverage we're doing, ATs, if they're doing field work, that can be some of it. And that's one of the things that kind of drew me into the trauma route, was not just for my officers, but as an athletic therapist and wanting to share it with athletic therapists, because we will see traumatic events, and it doesn't mean we're going to become traumatized. And I really wanted to help educate ATs on, well, how can we protect ourselves and our athletes if we do experience a traumatic event, whether it happens in front of us, it happens to us, or to somebody we know. How can we decrease our chances of becoming traumatized, right? Because just because we see a traumatic event, it doesn't mean we're going to have traumatization happen to us. So trauma is a big one that I'll look at. And the way I got down into that journey was in 2021. My sergeant, who knows I love learning, he's like, "Hey, we're doing this trauma resiliency program through Wounded Warriors Canada. Will you become one of our trainers?" And he was like, "We're only doing a few civilians arrest officers." I'm like, "Absolutely, I would love to do it." And day one, right away, they're like, "Okay, well, write down how trauma has impacted you, and, then we'll share." And, like, to my right, I have a homicide detective. To my, like, left, I have a forensic officer, and I'm like, "I don't think I've had any trauma to me." I'm like, "I've had a pretty good life. I've been pretty lucky." Like, and just knowing what they've been through, I'm like, "Oh, man, like, what am I going to offer to this?" And through that course, you realize, okay, no, we've all been impacted by trauma, and there are things that we can do to support each other better for it. And that really opened up, I guess, the rabbit hole that I went down after that, in terms of learning about creating a trauma informed approach to my practice. And with that, I don't necessarily need to know if somebody has seen a traumatic event. With the officers, you can safely assume they have been exposed. Maybe they're going through a current limbic response and they know it, or maybe they don't know it. And so it's taking into account any way they may present in the clinic as there might be something else going on, right? From maybe the words they use, or maybe it's because they don't want to sit with their back towards the door. They always want to have a view of the door. And so it's being aware of those subtle signs and trying to help create a sense of safety in the clinic space with just language you use, making sure that they keep in power of their position because that's a big one when somebody is struggling with a traumatic exposure is having control is really important. And so that's where the collaboration and staying connected with them can help. So it's nothing specific, it's not a route. When I speak on it, it's just reminding myself about being aware of the how common trauma is in my population, and then recognizing signs and behavior, maybe tension in the body. So maybe some of that pain is more stress and trauma related versus the actual injury if it's lingering. And then how can I adjust what I'm doing? So I always think of it a bit of a circle. You know, you keep learning, you keep adjusting, and so that one's always something that's in my mind, hands-on, but also in the gym because people are going to withstand exercises differently depending on what's going on in their bodies. So in strength and conditioning, people use the heart rate variability monitoring, right? So, where is somebody with their HRV? Are they in a hyper aroused or hypo aroused state? Like, where are they between fight and flight and rest and digest? And in psychology or trauma informed care, another way to look at it is the window of tolerance. So, it's not necessarily a objective measurement; it's more of a subjective one, and seeing how they relate there. And we can do movements in the gym to help them express that to get it out of their system, or if they are regulated and they're feeling good, we can actually increase their tolerance to hyperarousal and hypoarousal states through exercises that we use in the gym, and then they can become more resilient. So that's a bit of the approach in terms of the trauma. Another one, it's always on my intake sheet, is how long have you been an officer and how many years have you been in load carriage? So some will be undercover for a lot of years, so they haven't been wearing all that gear, but the vest and the belt absolutely impacts one's body, especially after 5 years. What I've seen it do to hips and the back and the thoracic spine, which then leads to shoulders, necks. Um, it's undeniable, and so then I always put in something preventative for them that addresses that, whether it's an area of pain or not. It's, "No, you're gonna need this. This is why." And they always seem to appreciate that too, that I'm looking at, "Okay, well, what's your history with your body?"
Yeah, and those vests are heavy. I've had to pick up a few and like they look small, they look
Yeah,
light, but as soon as you go to pick it up, it's a wow moment of how heavy it really is, and it has to be, right? But I can imagine that if they're wearing that uniform day in and day out, that it can be a lot on the system and
ab
a lot on the body.
absolutely, and often, they're sitting too, right? So we know tissue is not good with, small ranges of motion for long periods of time, right? And you're gonna have just decreased blood flow to that area, and with all that and what I've seen, it actually was one of the reasons why I became a cupping practitioner in the fall because they are getting compressed so much. I'm like, "Okay, well, maybe we should do some compression techniques to you. Maybe we do need to decompress your tissue, right?" And I know you're a cupping practitioner, and it's been very well received. It's been very popular, and I'm teaching some just to do some self cupping too to help. Okay, let's see if we can make your tissue a little bit more resilient. And once you say like you get feel compressed, right? This decompress, they're like, oh, well, yeah, like let's try that.
Yeah, and it's nice because cupping is one of those things that clients can do on themselves. So
Hmm.
usually through like a course of treatments, I teach them how to do it. They go out and they purchase a cupping set and they can do it when they need it and they still come back and they get their other treatment or they still want cupping done, but it's something that they can do on themselves and it can
Yeah,
have such a huge effect on the nervous system and
absolutely.
to reduce pain. I mean, there's some people who don't like it, but I find
Hmm.
there's more people who do like it and get lots of benefits from it. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and since so I got certified in September, and since then, like, a lot more people do it, and slowly trying to gather feedback from people because I'm curious in terms of, especially the ones who just come in for just general back for wellness, right? Like if they come in and they're not sore, they just want to do it for wellness, absolutely support that. And I'm like, let me know how your sleep is because when we're working on your thoracic spine and on your back here, we are having a positive impact on your nervous system. And I'm curious in terms of how will this help a population that does struggle with sleep, especially when it's often due to hypervigilance and being in more that hypo-aroused state. If I can help them at the end of shifts, they come in 30 minutes, general like cupping to calm down the nervous system, will they have a better transition out of shift into sleep? So that's to be answered.
Yeah, and that's I've never really thought of it that way. I do teach a cupping course, and I look at it more on that musculoskeletal side of it. But you can have such a huge effect on the nervous system, and I mean, if you think about acupuncture, there are certain points that help to regulate the nervous system, and you can do
Hmm.
cupping over top of those acupuncture points to get a very similar effect. And I mean, I'm of the opinion of, if it works, keep doing it. And if it doesn't work, move on, find something else because it
Yep,
doesn't work for everybody. And I think that's just
exactly.
part of, the human body is that there's nothing consistent about it from one person to
Hmm.
the next. And um so that's a really interesting thought as to how it changes people's sleep. And I have found I've been doing cupping for probably since 2017. And I've found that for some people, it just puts them in a state where they're very awake and they can't
Yeah.
sleep. And then
Okay.
for others, they need to take a nap when they leave.
Yeah, I just had one fall asleep just snoring away on my table as I'm cupping, and I'm, like, being very quiet because I'll do a lot more moving versus I don't do much stationary. I'll do some, but only for about 2 or 3 minutes, but otherwise, I'm doing a lot more moving, and yeah, I was like, "Great." I'm like, "This shows he's relaxed and trusts me. This is good. This is
Yeah,
good." So,
yeah. I feel like I could, talk so much about cupping, but I'll stop there.
yeah, 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 yeah. That's for another day. Yeah, I'm a big
Yeah,
fan. I'm so glad I took the training. So glad, yeah.
yeah, I absolutely love it. And use it all the time with clients that it works for. So, okay, on to my next question. So, what would be your most important piece of information or advice that you could give to an athletic therapist who's considering a career with the police force?
Okay. So a couple different things here, and one that just initially stands out to me that I share with individuals, and I realized it more when I was doing my research study for my master's because I interviewed some ATCs down in the States who work in police departments. And one had just started with a police department, and he had worked, I believe, like MLB and NBA. So he had worked with big teams. And he was really struggling, and it was in his first 6 months of trying to get them to accept him into their culture. And it's one where you really have to just take time to establish that trust beforehand, and that's everything. And even with the department that I started with in May, that was my even in my initial talk with them, like, this is what I'm doing at the beginning. It's just building that trust. I'm like, yes, some VPD members had gone over there, so some know me. And then when I got there, I did some were like, you tested me 10 years ago. And I'm like, oh, I hope I was nice. Well, I'm always nice, but sometimes, well, and I always yell, but I usually smile. But and they're like, no, no, it was good. I'm like, okay, good. I'm glad you felt supported because like I would train a lot of them. But I never went in with the assumption that, okay, well, they know me from here. I'm already in. No, this is new. Let me build into that relationship because it's such a different culture. Police officers do not just let anybody into that family. It takes time. And what they really like is, okay, you're just showing your eagerness to help them and to support them. And that they have a lot of information that they can share with you too. So you don't want to express yourself in a power position and you show you know your stuff, but it doesn't matter where you worked. It doesn't matter. Like sometimes that'll help with some of them, but in the big scheme of things, that's not going to get you into that circle of trust. But then once you're in there, you honestly can't escape it. Like me and like I have a couple of really close colleagues who work in police departments in the States, and we present a lot together, and we just laugh because no matter where we go, cops find us. Like I was at a concert in Washington State, an outdoor concert. Only people we met were cops. And me and my sister were walking around, oh, I should say, and the cops' wives, because we met the cops' wives first. And they're like, oh, well, why don't you come sit with us? And they're like, oh, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I work with the police department. And then, like, one other cop head, and they keep popping up. And they're like, oh, you work at a police department? And then turns out we knew a lot of the same people. And I don't know what it is, but if anybody approaches me or starts talking to me somewhere, 9 times out of a 10, it's a police officer. There's just they have this weird spidey sense, and they do it to each other too, so that's really interesting. So, building trust, and taking that time is really important. The other one is things move very slow in police departments, so if you put a proposal together, um, and it's been 6 months. 6 months in a police department is a blink of an eye. It may seem like a long period of time, um, from an external standpoint, but things move very slow. So follow up and keep trying to keep those connections going, because it usually doesn't mean they're not interested. It's just they might not know what to do with it. They're trying to get it to the right person. But then also, if they have other priorities come in, right? Crimes, big bust, stuff like that, that's going to trump it for a little bit. And you need to be okay with it. And so it's just being persevering and pushing through and helping with that. Just one last thing: if you do put a proposal together, because I've talked to quite a few ATs on this, um, search the strategic plan of the police department, because that's what all decisions are based on. It's public, it's out there. So if you want to know, okay, RCMPs might be a little harder for detachments, but if it's a municipal department, find out their strategic plan, because that's what decides where the money's going and what the chief is going to focus on. And they're the person manager, they're the money manager. So then see how your proposal to them can help support them towards their goals. If it doesn't go in there, there's a good chance they're gonna have a hard time looking at it. So, and it's easy to find strategic plans. I even did that for my new one when I was going in. I'm like, "Okay, what's their strategic plan?" when I was starting to outline my process.
That's great. That's a lot of really awesome and great information. And I mean, I had a couple of people reach out on Instagram asking if I could bring you on.
Oh,
And I don't know where, I don't know if they've just listened to some of your talks or if they follow you on social media. It was just I had a couple of people who were like, "Can you bring on Becky? I want to
aw.
hear from her." So I hope this information is helpful to them, and I think it will be, because that's yeah, I think it's great information to understand that before going into it, and to understand everything if you're trying to start working with the police force. So
Yeah, and they might
yeah.
have been ones, definitely some have found, like, I'm an open door, right? If especially if it's an AT who wants to learn about policing in this environment, send me a message, like I gave you my contact stuff, which we'll share. Reach out. I'm happy to try and help, and provide guidance, or even just brainstorm, or you can pick my brain. I'm happy to try and connect. So,
Yeah, that's great, and I'll, link that in the show notes as well, so that
okay.
people can get a hold of you if they need to, or if they want to. Before I wrap this up, is there anything else that you wanted to add in?
Ooh, I don't think so. Let's see. I feel like we covered a good chunk, and hopefully this sparks some interest for people for looking into police departments. Like that is a big hope for me, is that we can get more ATs into police departments here. It is growing quite a bit down in the States. The first program was out of Fairfax County in 2006, and like, I'm lucky to have met Nancy Burke a few times, and a really close friend of mine has taken over her spot, and they're growing quite a bit. And there is the Public Safety Athletics Trainers Society down in the States. I think membership is $25. They have a lot of online content. So if you're interested in fire, because fire has a lot of ATs in down in the States, and Arthur Andrews is doing a great job here in BC in getting jobs for ATs in fire. Um, Check out, yeah, Public Safety Athletic Trainers Society. The membership fee is low. They have a virtual conference coming up that always has some stellar people. And another great one is the NSCA Tactical Strength and Conditioning branch. Amazing content, amazing courses there. So yeah, any way to try and help people learn more, even if it's just in your own practice, or if it is an area that you're like, oh, I'd love to try and get in there. Those are always places that I'll send people to look for content because there's so much information out there now. The research is just booming in terms of tactical support. So
That's great. That's good to know. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and sum this up, and let me know if I miss anything. So, on our first question of how you became part of the police force and what's inspired you, you kind of just you saw a posting, you read through it, you just it was you and it fit your personality and who you are perfectly. And your dad really liked it because it
yeah,
was stable and it was a pension. And I know that
yeah,
that's a big thing for ATs, right? Most of us are sole proprietors and
yeah.
we're self-contracted, so there is no pension and it's not stable, and so we have to put that money aside. But so looking at something like that is a really it can be a highlight
Hmm.
of a job. So I can see why your dad really wanted that and why you chose that. And initially you thought of it as a stepping stone, but as you got into it, you really just loved the environment, you loved the people, you loved being there, and you saw that switch into into working with tactical athletes and really found joy in working with them and problem solving, and seeing that there's as I think the CATA thing is, we are all athletes.
Hmm.
Um, but seeing the police force, when there's an injury, there's a lot more consequences that can come from that injury when it comes to, going back out if they have an injury, and they're not 100%, how is that going to affect their colleagues or the people that they're working with, or, being able to catch somebody that they need to catch. And you mentioned how, the media does not share how much these members are working and what they're giving up in order to be able to support their communities and help their communities. And I completely agree with that. Um, and as much as you love, working with them and helping them feel better, you also really want to focus on, and you like focusing on what their retirement looks like so that they're not having to work on their injuries after they retire. But if they can work on this now and work with their bodies and their health and wellness now, then they can have a more enjoyable retirement.
Absolutely.
And then we got into talking about some unique challenges, and part of that was starting to understand the working with the system and teaching them and getting them to understand the value and need of having an athletic therapist on staff, and the value and need of having additional staff because initially it was difficult getting approval because chain of command and the time it takes for that paperwork to go through. You had that support, but it takes time, like you mentioned, and there's lots of red tape and bureaucracy. But in the end, after it took, I think you said 2 years, in the end, it got approved, and it was totally worth it. It was worth being able to work with the officers, being able to get them to where they want to be, and their appreciativeness was just very apparent. And I think you used the word, that sunset. You got to that sunset in the end, and
Hmm.
it was fantastic. And then we started talking about how your approach to injury prevention and treatment differs when you're working with police officers compared to a traditional private setting clinic. And you mentioned Tim Black and his work around um, trauma care, and some of the courses that you took with him. And I believe it was the Wounded Warriors. There was another word in there that I missed.
Yeah, Wounded Warriors Canada was where I did the course through was the trauma resiliency training program. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so the Wounded Warriors Canada, you took that in 2021, and working with Tim Black, you worked on changing language that's being used with the tactical um tactical athletes, sorry. And looking at how their profession can really cause exposure to that trauma. And at the same time, you got really interested in how you as an AT and athletic therapists in general can be exposed to trauma and how we can protect ourselves when we're working in those situations, whether it's with, there can be trauma in the clinic, there can be trauma in the field, there can be trauma in all aspects of our jobs as ATs. And so that's where you
Mhm.
started learning more about it and sharing with other athletic therapists how we can protect ourselves and how we can help our clients who have gone through any sort of trauma concerns. And then your biggest thing about it is, working with collaborating and staying connected with your clients, with other professionals, paying attention to their signs and behaviors when you're working with them, either hands-on or in the gym, and adjusting what you're doing because just having that little bit of adjustment can really change that nervous system to either to go in the direction that we want to go. And you talked about how some people really use the HRV um, to keep an eye on that, or they'll just pay attention to some of those cues that our clients are giving us. And then using exercise to increase our resilience to trauma is an important part of your care in the police force. And um, and then in addition to that, thinking about what the stresses are on the body. So you mentioned that some of the police officers are spending a lot of time sitting, right? There's a lot of paperwork involved in it. Or on the
Mhm.
other end, they're carrying, their super heavy equipment and vests, and that can have an alternate effect on the body. And then we got into talking about your most important piece of advice for athletic therapists. And, you had three things in there. One was to take time to establish that trust with the members because it does take time, but eventually you'll get there
Mhm.
and you'll be a part of the family. And the second one was things do move slow. And this is where that red tape and bureaucracy comes into place. But be patient, follow up, and keep those connections because eventually it'll happen if you follow up with it. And then if you are submitting a proposal, look up the strategic plan for the police department and then align your goals with what their goals are, because if it's completely different, and I feel like that's the same thing if you're getting it, if you're applying for a job, right? You're not going to have completely different goals from what the job goals are.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but really interesting because I did not know that that was public knowledge.
Mhm. I'm always able to find it, so if I'm curious about a police department, I can sniff it out.
Noted. um, and then additionally to that, you if athletic therapists are interested in learning more about some of what you have talked about, signing up with the Public Safety Athletic Training Society, it's $25. They have a virtual conference coming up, and then looking into NSCA, the Tactical Strength and Conditioning branch. Because they've got both of them have a lot of really good information and courses for working with our tactical athletes
Mhm.
in fire, police, ambulance services.
Yeah.
Did I catch all of that?
You did. Great summary.
Okay.
Great job.
All right. Anything else you wanted to add?
No, that's all. This has been wonderful. Just and thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. But before I let you go, can you just quickly let us know the best place for people to reach out if they have any questions for you?
Yeah. I am on Instagram, so my main handle on there is Becky Swan AT. I have another one called Blue Line Vitality. I'm not on there as much now with the new department. It's kind of taken my energy to focus on developing this. I'm pretty good with messages on there, or my email is beckyswan@me.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm not the greatest on LinkedIn messages. I try, but it's whatever reason that platform I have a little bit of a barrier. But feel free to reach out, and happy to try and connect. So
Yeah, I'll link all of those in the show notes. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat. And I really appreciate meeting Mabel.
yeah, hopefully the listeners weren't too disrupted as I was distracted with my giant puppy
No, it
poking and
was
barking.
it was great. All right. Have a great day. Thank you so much.
You too. Have a great day.